Mr. President, you have said nobody could have seen this pandemic coming. But in fact, Secretary Azar at a biodefense summit in April 2019 said, of course, the thing that people ask, what keeps you most up at night in the biodefense world? Pandemic flu, of course. I think everyone in this room probably shares that concern. Your own Health and Human Services Secretary was aware that this had the potential of being a very big problem around the world, a pandemic of this nature. Who dropped the ball?
Well, I always knew that pandemics are one of the worst things could happen. There's been nothing like this since probably 1917. That was the big one in Europe. It started actually here and went to Europe, probably. I've heard about, excuse me, wait a minute, let me finish. I've heard about this for a long time, pandemics. You don't want pandemics.
If you were preparing for a pandemic, if this government were preparing for a pandemic, why is it we don't have enough masks? Why is it we don't have enough medical equipment in this country?
Previous administrations gave us very little ammunition for the military and very little shelf space. Let me just tell you, you know it, you know the answer. The previous administration, the shelves were empty. The shelves were empty. So what you should do is speak to the people from the previous administration, Jim, and ask them that question. Because the shelves were empty. And you know what else? The military shelves were also empty. We had no ammunition, literally. And that was said by one of your favorite generals. We have no ammunition. Guess what? We had very little medical supply also. All right.
Yup, Trump always knew that pandemics could be bad, since day one, which must be why he fired a spate of top biodefense and global health officials in 2018, shuttered the entire global health security unit at the National Security Council, ignored warnings from outgoing Obama officials about what could become, quote, the worst influenza pandemic since 1918, and disregarded warnings from our own U.S. intelligence reports in January and February about a likely pandemic. That's how much Trump was just certain about the impending dangers of an outbreak. But what's worse is that Trump went from swearing up and down that he was ready for a pandemic to blaming Obama for not having enough supplies. You don't get to pat yourself on the back for having such genius foresight and then in the same breath blame the guy who left office in 2016 for not restocking the shelves over the last 4 years. I mean, this logic is absurd. You don't get to have it both ways. But Trump is trying to take credit for being some genius of preparation when it comes to global pandemics, and yet couldn't manage to stock up on equipment and do a single thing to fix what he himself says are empty shelves. And clearly that wasn't lost on Jim Acosta, who tries multiple times to tell Trump while he was busy blaming Obama that the last president hasn't been in office for nearly 4 years. And of course, Trump talked over him and wouldn't acknowledge this point. But that's probably because his argument doesn't hold water. Whether in fact the stockpile was depleted is entirely uncertain, and it's abundantly clear that we wouldn't get an honest answer on that from Trump anyway. But even if it was depleted, even if the shelves were completely empty and tumbleweeds were blowing through barren warehouses, it was Trump's job to fill it. This isn't January of 2017. Trump has been president for nearly 4 years. He is responsible for what happens now. Perhaps if he'd been more concerned with taking proactive measures to keep us safe, instead of undoing every single piece of legislation with Obama's name on it, we wouldn't be in a situation where doctors and nurses are being forced to reuse contaminated masks and wear garbage bags and rain ponchos for protection. Perhaps all of that time rolling back Obama's fuel standards for cars and trying to rip healthcare away from millions of Americans because the law was named after Obama could have been better spent preparing for the inevitability of a pandemic, especially considering, as Trump has been quick to brag, that he was more than aware that this could happen. Of course, the truth is that despite the myriad of warnings, Trump didn't care because he was never interested in the long-term health of the country, but rather in whatever short-term goals were right in front of his face. He exploded the deficit with a corporate tax cut that will take years, if not decades, to recover from, but he only cared about the immediate PR from business owners who were more than pleased. He hollowed out experts from every corner of government so that he could brag about reducing federal spending, with no forethought about just how unprepared it would leave us in situations that actually call for their expertise. There are literally zero policies that he put in place that will better this country in the future in any meaningful way. Instead, this entire presidency is operating on a day-to-day basis to pile up as many talking points as he can for the sole sole purpose of retaining his grip on power in the next election. The only date that concerns Donald Trump and Republicans is November 3rd, 2020. As for these press briefings, if reporters hear the president barrel through Jim Acosta's completely valid question without answering it, it's the next reporter's job to pick up where he left off. It shouldn't just be Jim Acosta holding this president accountable, because we are seeing firsthand the consequences of a president acting without accountability. We see it on a daily basis, as Trump downplayed the virus and claimed it was contained and refused to invoke the Defense Production Act earlier and gave incorrect messages about nationwide websites and on and on. And it's precisely that lack of leadership that has put us in such a woefully precarious position as the virus continues to sweep across this country. The danger here isn't just the virus, it's Trump's response to it. And unless people start to hold him to account,